It's Fake Andy Warhol's 15 Minutes. In Theory. Episode 0. Topics include post-pop politics, culture war consumerism, revolution against nature, or revolution against artificial society. But do people like us even deserve a better world? And under a spreading chestnut tree, I sold you and you sold me.
Popular and famous as art objects. He also created a series of 10 portraits of famous Jews of the 20th century. But more about that later. Meanwhile, his appearance this morning on Miami Beach to tour the Art Deco district turned into a media event with cameras, reporters, groupies, kids, and curious onlookers all crowding around Warhol, who looks like a white-haired cherub out of a 19th century Dickens novel. I talked to the famous artist about his art before the luncheon at the famous restaurant. Your work tends to be, I don't want to use the word sensational because that connotes something bad, but you want attention.
Well, I regard all media, especially all new media, as impositions. Most people, when they find out that there's something new out there that may speak to interests that they have, they get quite excited. They're happy to see that, oh, there's a new show, there's a new podcast, there's a new author out there who is interested in the subject matter that I've been interested in, and this new creator or this new content may be fun or interesting for me to consume. That's the way that most people think of it. I don't think of it that way. I regard anything new as an immense imposition because I've already read and consumed so much, and there's already so many ideas out there. There's already so much entertainment out there that whenever anyone brings a new author, especially, but even a new album or a new song or a new meme to my attention, I regard it as an insult, really. So with this podcast, I want to. It's either going to go one of two ways. I'm either going to waste a lot of people's time, including my own, or I'm going to provide something hopefully relatively unique. I'm going to work as hard as I can to provide something unique. Now, this may last one episode, it may last 100 episodes. I have certain people who would like to come on to speak about certain topics. I don't know if that will happen. But to address your question more, I put out the content that I put out because it scratches a slight artistic itch that I have, and I have the free time to have done this. I do not foresee that I'll have this amount of time in the future, so I'll have to decide if I want to continue producing any sort of content, and we'll just see where things go. The memes that I make, I do it. I mean, if people like them, if people get a kick out of them, that's fine. I try to be slightly subversive with my memes, although I'm not sure how subversive memes can actually be. Overall, I do not like memes. I'm extremely anti-meme. I think that memes trick people. They trick the people who create them as well as the people who like them. There's an immense delusion out there that memes can change the world, and this stems, I think, from 2016. People believe that memes were responsible for Trump's win, or people believe that memes helped push the UK Brexit vote the way that it went, and this is an error. This has tricked and confused so many people. Those votes went the way that they did because of older people. Older people liked Trump because they saw him on TV. And that's why Trump won, not because of frog memes. And Brexit went the way it did because of older people, and older people are not into this hip meme culture. So, but since 2016, we've had this idea, and it's not as strong as it was last year, which is good, but it's immensely incorrect to think that these little memes change the world, or that the ruling powers would allow them to. People are trapped in their own little online cultural enclaves, and they see the proliferation of memes there, and they don't really consider how large the world is and how large society is, and the ruling powers have still much more control than online dissidents gave them credit for. That should be obvious by now, and for the last 5 years or so, people have been wanting to fight the meme war, and it's quite clear now that you can win a meme war and yet lose reality, and that's what's happened. I mean, people have ceded reality. I mean, C-E-D-E, cede. They have ceded reality. So I'm very, very anti-meme overall. I particularly dislike the cliches that are used, the small range of vocabulary terms that are used. I'm reminded quite often of the George Orwell essay, Politics of the English Language, in which he goes over why not to use cliches and not to use these stock phrases, because it severely diminishes the range of thought and what you can do with your thought and with your words. And with memes in particular, I completely hate the language that is used. I hate the Wojak cartoons. I see these as severely misrepresenting human beings and trying to force human beings into very superficial caricatures. It's quite heartbreaking, actually, to see people so enthusiastically take these memes on and to represent themselves as superficial cartoons. Cartoons have been used to represent human beings for a long time, obviously, and yet the cartoons that these online activists use to represent themselves are the most dehumanizing cartoons. To me, it seems as if this has the effect of normalizing dysfunction and causing people to sort of like their own powerlessness and to restrict their emotional breadth and to cheapen their thought and to restrict the nuance of their thought. I mean, everything is pulled in 2 or 3 directions. It's either cringe or it's based or it's laugh out loud, I suppose. And these words should not be used as often as they're being used, and I try not to use them. With political memes in particular, their usage has the effect of tricking people into thinking that this is actually going to affect the world, and this is actually activism, and this is actually going to change things. And I see people increasingly out of touch with the world and the way that the world works, and all of your memes don't amount to anything. It is only a way to waste your own time. But on the other hand, who doesn't enjoy a good laugh, you know? Memes can make people laugh. I see nothing wrong with humor, but what I am most assertively against is the idea of memes as activism. Especially in the position that we're in, I do not think memes should be confused with activism or with educating people. I think there is some slight capacity there, but it has been dramatically exaggerated, especially in the minds of the people who create memes. I see all of this. I see all of the online humor with a philosophical or a political edge to be a sort of a chicken coop, or at the most, if you want to be kind, you could call it a sort of a cultural holding pattern. But I prefer the connotations of calling it a chicken coop. I received an email earlier today. I'm on a university email group, and even though I'm not in a university and haven't been in quite a long time, but I still receive emails from this group. And every week, once or twice, they send something out, and almost every email is the headlines make it seem like the world's ending, that we're in the biggest catastrophe ever. This is how the emails have seemed, at least since for 5 or 6 years now. And this email, I don't have it here, but the headline was something like, "These are the 2 greatest threats to the university." And when I saw this, I thought to myself, what could they mean? I thought they were going to say white nationalism or something like that. And I clicked the email, and no, what they said that the biggest threats were was climate change and cyber hacking. And I look at this and I just think like the email is sent out as if it's like an emergency alert. And I still thought that it would be something like related to the events of earlier this year. I would have thought that university people would be concerned with that still, and perhaps they are. But no, it makes it seem as if they think that the icebergs are going to melt so quickly that this afternoon you might not be able to get to your class because like the university's underwater or something like that. And really what they hardly ever touch on in these emails that they send out is the fact that everyone who's involved in the universities, they're just going on a week by week basis. They're just getting crazier and crazier and more hysterical, and they feel like they're more and more under threat from all sorts of threats that are not present really in any way. And but they don't talk about that. They don't talk about how they themselves are going, by any standard, insane. And they've gone more and more insane for a long time now. But I don't really know. It's not that I don't know how this will end, but I don't know how this can end, especially when technology is allowing for so many stopgaps. You know, if a professor can't teach in person, if a student can't be in class, there are other ways to remotely, quote unquote, learn. It's not that I don't know how this could end, because when you think about that, the response would be something like, well, it's just going to end with these people just physically breaking down and screaming constantly, unendingly, until they, I don't know, have a heart attack or something. But I don't think that's going to happen. If something like that could happen to even like 5% of them, then maybe a real stop would happen in a real space. I hate this phrase. Maybe that would, if 5% of them had heart attacks all at once, then that might create a space where they could like rethink everything that they're doing, but that's not going to happen. So the question isn't how it could end. The question is if it could end. Since about 2008, I have exercised for about an hour every day, almost every day. And if I'm not able to get my exercise in the afternoon, then I become extremely cranky. It's really, really nice. I would recommend people just exercise in their homes or their offices if they can. Here's this phrase again that I hate. If you can create a space where you can exercise, you can install things that allow you to do pull-ups. There's a mat you can buy. You can buy things to do other exercises, and in a very small amount of space, you can do lots of different exercises. And when I've done this, I've listened to usually pop culture podcasts. I've listened to a number of them over the years. I listen to them until I can't stand the hosts anymore. And quite early on, I began to sense that it's good to listen to these things because I don't like the people really who are in charge of them. They come from a point of view that I do not like. So when I'm and yet they're not horrible people, usually. So when you're exercising, you feel like the slight annoyance of what you're hearing these people talk about when they talk about their TV shows and movies and comic books and all this nerd stuff. And when you're a little bit upset, you can exercise more. And so it's great audio to exercise to. And earlier this week, I tuned into one of these shows. I'm not going to say who it was. And it was someone that I'd listened to a few times, but I don't really know this person. And looking at the person, I would just assume, okay, this is just a complete dweeb. And yet the guy began talking about politics. And he talked about what his life was like. And just as a brief overview, he has a wife, he has a kid, or I think he said 2 kids. And he's owned shops. He's owned nerd shops, shops that sell Funko Pops and, I don't know, Dungeons and Dragons and all these things that these people want. From what he said, it seemed like this guy has done pretty well for himself. And I think he said that he lives in California. I'm almost certain he said that, in a quite upscale part. So I say all that to say that this is not like a quote-unquote incel loser. No, this is a guy who has a wife and kids, has done pretty well for himself. And he begins talking about politics. And of course, when most of these kinds of people talk about politics, they talk about how SJW wokeism has infiltrated whatever films or TV shows that they watch. And this is the way that it's been for quite a while with a lot of these podcasts. I mean, there's obviously 2 types. There's the podcasters who just completely go along with whatever the corporations give them, and they find reasons to like anything. I mean, they can be like long-term. They can have been interested in all of these properties for a long time, and yet when the new Star Wars movie comes out that in some sense shits on the originals, the original films, the original characters, these fans who go along with everything will just say, well, they will just not acknowledge that it's an insult because their prime directive is to consume and to enjoy what they're consuming. And they don't really reflect much on anything unless they can reflect on it in a positive way. The other group of pop culture podcasters and YouTube people, they seem to take issue with everything. And what this guy that I listened to recently had to say was that, okay, we've reached the point where we know almost all of these actors hate us. They want to enslave us, basically. They want to produce films that take shots at us constantly. There is no way that they're ever going to course correct. The corporations that are behind them hate us. They will call us whatever dehumanizing thing they want to call us and act like we're the worst people on earth simply because we want, I don't know, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles the way it was 10 years ago, not the way it is this year, or whatever the fuck they've got going on. And this guy that I was listening to, so he begins to go over all that, and it's like, well, yeah. And then he said he expands on his political talking points and he gives a pretty good overview of the political situation here in the U.S., and I was slightly impressed with what he had to say. But then here's what happened. He, towards the end of all this, he says, I just want to be entertained. I just want entertainment. I just want to not cringe, to not hold my breath when a new pop culture product is released. And for me, this is quite odd. It's quite odd that I find it odd that someone who, up to that point, his assessment of the situation was quite good, and yet he still just wants to consume. And this is a 50-year-old guy, at least 55 maybe. This is a 55-year-old guy who he has a wife and kids, and he's able to earn a living. Why do you need content? Why do you need entertainment? I mean, why? It's so odd because up to that point, he's talking about what the situation is. I mean, if you have a political situation like the political situation that he's talking about, then don't you think you should not be concerned with being entertained? I mean, if your country is really like coming apart, maybe you should not care about being entertained. And there's another one of these guys that I listen to. And coincidentally, he's in the same situation. He has a wife and he has 2 kids. And from the way that he talks about things, he's doing quite well for himself. And yet, on the side, he has this podcast where he talks about cartoons and comic books and movies and all this stuff. And earlier this week, he put out a show. I mean, I call it a show. It was probably like 15 minutes long. I didn't listen to it. I just saw that he put it out. And the title of it is something along the lines of Captain America deserves good stories. This guy is upset that apparently recent Captain America comic books are too ideological. They're all from a left-wing point of view, obviously. And based on what this guy said in other shows of his that I've heard, I know what his argument is. And his argument is that, look, I just want to read a Captain America comic book where Captain America goes on an adventure. I don't want Captain America to go through these unending arcs, which he's done for the last 20 years or so, where Captain America in these comic books is constantly questioning, oh, what's happened to the American dream? I don't know if I can trust my government. Oh, what's happening to the people of this country? This isn't the America I grew up in. Blah, blah, blah. Now, it's all from a center-left point of view. But this guy is kind of center-left. And yet his problem is that, look, I'm just kind of sick of this. I just don't want any ideology. I just don't want any politics constantly in every Captain America comic book. I just want Captain America to go on a globe-trotting adventure. And I want him to fight someone who's not a neo-Nazi, which apparently is kind of would be a rare thing, because apparently all Captain America has fought for the last 20 years has been like World War II holdovers and people who are like the wrong side of that conflict. And there again, too, I just have to question, why do you, as a 57-year-old man or 52-year-old man, whatever this guy is, why do you need to be entertained? I mean, this guy knows what the situation is. And this guy knows, it's not like you can't go back and read Captain America comic books from the 80s, which is another thing this guy talks about. This guy talks about, I'm going to do an episode talking about how these 7 Captain America comic books from 1986 were so great. Then he does another episode. He does an hour and a half chat with this other guy that he brings on, talking about how this 1989 Captain America story, this was really good. So it's not like this guy can't go back and read these older Captain America comic books if that's what he wants. If he wants this old-fashioned swashbuckling Captain America that wasn't that political. And this guy, from other things that he's said, this guy knows what's going on. This guy knows how insane everything is. And yet it's this guy too. He's clinging to entertainment. And me personally, I haven't really consumed media for entertainment in a long time. And I saw the Mortal Kombat movie. I watched most of it the other day, and it just doesn't hold my interest. It doesn't hold my interest. I can see in theory where people would want escapism, but for people who are sort of tuned in, it's kind of hard to even accept it. Now, something that these two podcasters would complain about is that they don't want culture creators who are ideological. Now, the first guy that I talked about, he would be, I would say, center-right. And the second guy that I talked about would be center-left. And yet they've both complained that, it seems like a lot of the culture creators for these supposed entertainment products, they're all like left-wing ideologues. Well, the left-wing ideologues, they look at the situation and they say, why in this situation would I want to just entertain? Why would I not use everything in my arsenal, everything that I have, to promote ideology, to push people in the direction that I want them to be pushed? And what the podcasters don't understand is that the situation, there's no relief from the situation. And if you're serious about the situation, there shouldn't be. I mean, I exaggerate some. It's not like you can't laugh ever. But, why would things change? Why would things improve if you're not going to take steps to improve them? And all these people, whether they're center-right, center-left, all these people who just want to, return to some sort of normality, why would that happen? And there's no reason why it would happen. Warhol said that pop was about liking things. An interviewer asked him, "What is pop?" And the response was that pop is about liking things. And people have taken that idea and they've applied it to his work and to the culture that we're in, the culture that we've been in for roughly 100 years now. And they've said that, well, what this culture is all about, it's about, do you like this flavor of soup or that flavor of soup? Do you like this network news or that network news? Or this website or that website? Or do you like Nintendo or PlayStation or Xbox? That's a lot of what the culture is. That applies to our political choices also. I mean, for a long time, for about 100 years, over 100 years, I would say, there have been people who have been concerned about how people don't really understand what the politicians stand for, but they vote for them because they like them. And the obvious emblematic statement of this was the Eisenhower slogan, "I like Ike." The entire culture is predicated on this, and when you look at the way internet culture rose, it's a large factor in that, and a large thing that people do is they click the like button, they click the thumbs up, they click the heart. And that's all that the culture is about. And whether you like a huge media production, or you like a presidential candidate, or you like your aunt's image that she uploaded to Instagram, it's about what you like, and your participation has increasingly been centered around what you like and people's identities, how they define themselves, how they describe themselves, how they differentiate themselves from other people. It's about what they like. And I talked about all this in the Warhol Christian book. And I also talked about how Christian represents a turning point or an end point. Hopefully it's an end point, but it seems more likely that it's a turning point. That it is not just about what you like, but it's increasingly about what you hate. It used to be that people became well known because a lot of people liked them. But increasingly, and this sort of took off from reality TV, although it in a sense predates that, and to say reality TV is a simplification. And I really do think that this flowered with Christian, where someone becomes well-known, very famous worldwide, not because people like them, but because people hate them. Now, in a sense, you could say, well, it's still about liking. This is pop culture that's still about liking, but, and it's a major but, it's about liking hating something, or liking hating someone. And when Chris Chan first became somewhat well known, Chris assumed that it was because people liked the artwork and the characters. And Chris made a YouTube clip where I think Chris said something like, "Well, it seems that I have a lot more Sonichu fans than I assumed I did." That was the assumption, and yet no, there are a few people that like the Sonichu comic books, but more and more and more, what people did was they liked hating this guy. They liked laughing at this guy. This sort of politics, it's sort of like post-pop politics, because we're defined not by what we like, but by what we hate. Now, obviously, this is nothing new. At least in the 80s, probably prior to that, there are definite trends about how we have to vote for this candidate even though we don't like him, because we hate the other candidate. So in a sense, yes, that has been the case for a while. But I think recently, the trend is just exponential now, where very, 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 very few people like Joe Biden. And yet, roughly half the country voted for him. And he won. Now, maybe you could go back. You could go back and say, well, roughly half the country always votes for the person who does not quite win, even if they don't like them. I would, it's easy to go back through and say, well, not many people really liked Mitt Romney. Well, but Mitt Romney didn't win. So we're in a space now where I really think that a turning point has happened, where it's not just hatred that's a factor. It's not just a factor. Hatred is the primary factor. And even the people that can like a certain candidate or can like a certain politics, they're more driven by hatred of the other now. Hatred of the other was always there, but now it's the primary driving force in a majority of political people, I would say. And we're at a point now where, to me, it's quite obvious to look at the political landscape, not even the political landscape, just the landscape of the country itself, and you have a large contingent of people who are willing to go into totalitarianism, who would be fine with it, and who would want to do it, as long as it pisses off the people that they like seeing get pissed off. You list out certain ideas of things that could happen, and you present this list to people. It's a list of, I hate this word, draconian things that could happen. A list of, just an abstract list of, the economy is going to be bad, the job market's going to be hard, everyone's going to be stressed out, you're not going to get what you want on a personal level, etc., etc. Present someone with a list of all these horrible things, then ask them, would you want to go into a reality that looks like this? And they would say no. But add something at the end of the list. Add something that, you know who is really going to get pissed off about this? The political party that you don't like. And they're going to feel that it's all about them. It's all an attack on them. Add that little caveat. And now, people would not agree to it consciously, but they have agreed to it subconsciously. They already have. They're fine with the way this is turning out. They're fine with the way the world's going, because they get such a kick out of the other side being pissed off and feeling like it's an attack on them. That's how people are now. I mean, people take a lot of glee in the suffering of others. That's why I've always said, and I wrote this, not in the most recent book, in a previous one, that a lot of the people themselves, if not the majority, they're more corrupt than the politicians. They're as corrupt or more corrupt than the elite. The people themselves are. Now, on an everyday level, when you interact with them, they don't seem that way. But when push comes to shove, when they need to decide what side they're on, at a critical time when, well, you're either going to vote for this or you're not, or at a critical time where you're either going to say you're okay with these people or you're going to throw them to the wolves, at those critical moments, these otherwise nice enough people, they turn into psychopaths. And as someone who's not like them, there's a temptation then to take joy in these people being themselves stressed out and depressed and anxious, because a lot of these people are also, they love to see the other side get upset, but they themselves are also getting upset. So as an observer, it's hard not to take pleasure in everybody getting upset, pretty much, because we've all the situation that we're in, and I know this is abstract, we're all responsible, in a sense. There's a lot of people still that say that they don't trust the media, and yet they seem to go along with what the media says. Something that you want to watch out for are these people who they claim to be objective. There are these people who say, well, I usually or I always vote one side, but I'm open to the other side. They're really not open. This is a tactic that I find worse than any sort of hardline partisanship, because at least partisans will be honest about it. But there are these people out there that they hide behind this cloak of, well, I'm impartial. And these people can even list out certain politicians from the other side that they would consider voting for. Now, if those candidates ever became a presidential candidate, I don't think these people would actually end up committing to them, because I think that the media would find or drudge up something on them. But anyway, there's all these people out there that they don't trust the media, they say, and you can look at graphs and charts saying that, like, trust in the media is, if not at an all-time low, then still pretty close to it. And what happens? You know, why all these people continue to behave as if they trusted the media or trusted the politicians, trusted the experts? They do so also because they know that there are other people out there that hate these behaviors and these opinions, so they just act in ways that they think will piss other people off. So once again, it's a post-pop politic. These people do things that hurt themselves, that put an artificial ceiling on their own lives and prospects. You know, they hurt themselves. They sell themselves short. These people lead lives of artificially low expectations and artificially low prospects. They don't try. They don't live up to their potential. They do things even if it hurts themselves in a certain way, because behaving otherwise would be an admission that the other side was right. I mean, if you supposedly hate capitalism, then you're not going to look for opportunities. You're not going to be one of those greedy capitalists. And you think of all of the Hollywood films made by capitalists, made by rich people who, try as hard as they can to make as much as they can. But just think of all of the films in the last 30, 35, 40 years maybe, where interwoven into the themes are, well, you don't need much to be happy, and money's not everything. And those sorts of bromides, there's truth in them, but there's a lot of truth in them. And yet the effects of those messages are to diminish the audience from trying. That's what happens. That's really what happens. That's the effect, whether the writers and the actors and the producers know that or not. That's the effects that they've had. And you see it on the right, too. There's a lot of people out there that, just to give an example from the other side, there's a lot of people out there that wouldn't read sociology books or postmodern philosophy texts because, that's associated with Marxism or something. So they're not going to learn any insights because, well, that's Marxist claptrap or something. That's what they think. But that's what people do, and that's more post-pop politics where people's life directions are sort of dictated by what they don't like. You know, when people say that they're a communist, and there are a lot of people that are on my Instagram, and they call themselves communists. I mean, that's okay. You can call yourself whatever you want to call yourself. But I would question the degree to which, you know, how does you calling yourself a communist, how is there any more reality in that than in Christian calling herself a cartoon character? You know, I mean, you say you want communism. Well, how is real communism any more real or any more feasible than the dimensional merge? I mean, I don't see how, and it's not just communism, it's really any of these ideologies. I mean, I don't see how any sort of strict race-based political situation is remotely possible. It's not possible at all. And I don't see it. I mean, you're free to disagree, just like you're free to disagree if you think real communism can happen. Now, if you're saying, just to stick with the more safe assumption of talking about communism, because that's really safe, if you're saying that you're a communist because you want to sort of push in that direction, you know, that kind of makes sense to me. But I mean, I don't see true communism as any more real than Christian's dimensional merge. I mean, they're equally fantastical. They are, and yet you can say, well, look, I mean, there's thousands of books, tens of thousands, maybe 1 million books from serious people that have been written about what communism is. So it's a real thing. And I would say, well, yeah, I mean, there's scientists too that say that the multiverse is real. And maybe in a theoretical sense, the multiverse is real. And all Christian says is that these other multiverses are going to merge with our own. And I mean, I don't think so. I think that's absurd. I told Christian that. I don't, just a side note, I don't really like how a lot of interviewers have sort of entertained Christian by acting as if they believe that the merge could happen, or that, you know, these other dimensions are real. I let Christian know when Chris contacted me. You know, I just, you know, it wasn't a big deal, but I wanted to make it known that, yeah, I was not entertaining this fantastical stuff. So, but yeah, there are theoretical scientists out there who they say, you know, the multiverse is real. And I, you know, just like there are, you know, political scholars out there that say communism's possible. And there have been obviously politicians out there that have said, I'm a communist, I'm working towards communism. Well, and there are people out there that say, yeah, I'm half cartoon character. I'm working towards the cartoon world. I have a fursona. I'm half My Little Pony character. There are all these people out there, and I don't really see what the difference is. I mean, I don't really see there being much of a difference. But I'm extremely open and accepting of all of these points of view. When people talk about like the technological singularity that we're accelerating towards, I would liken that to whether or not the whale that we're trapped in is conscious and can speak. So we're already trapped in a technological whale, a leviathan, if you will. Technology has been in charge of human affairs for over 100 years. It builds on itself. It uses humans as tools. This idea that the worst canard out there at this point is this idea that technology is a tool and we decide how to use it. That is less and less true. That has been less and less true. And the prevailing force on this planet ceased being human beings over 100 years ago. It's technological development. And when people talk about AI or the singularity, I just look at that and I just think, well, that doesn't really matter. You know, they think that human beings will lose their top spot when AI happens or when the singularity happens. And I would say, no, we lost our top spot 100 years ago. And World War II sealed the deal. The real victor of World War II was technology itself, because the war sort of mobilized all human resources into making technology, and there's no going back after that. The only way we're going to get out of this system is for technological development to somehow, of its own accord, screw up. And what life looks like after that, you know, is it Mad Max? I don't know. But we're not in charge, and I don't see really how we can consciously influence that. So yeah, I mean, all this stuff about the singularity. I mean, it's vaguely interesting, but it's all coming from people who don't understand that the real turning point has already happened. It happened a long time ago. To read about this, you need to read Jacques Ellul. Ellul is the author that you want to read. He's not read about everything, and I'm not taking a very strident stance. This is just what I think is true. Almost constantly, I view all these people, and I'm just struck by this absurdly inflated sense of agency that they think the human race has, and the human race does not have this agency. And on a smaller political front, local politics, you can influence things still somewhat, but even on a statewide level, I mean, things are so overdetermined now that most of what's happening is directed by mental techniques that technology itself has enacted upon human beings. So whether you want to try to resist the general flow, that's very temporary. And just in general, I mean, all these, and I find you all very interesting. I find all these things quite interesting usually. But all these people, these podcasters, YouTubers, I don't go on Twitter, but I find all of your political ideas interesting, but there's no way for any of these things to happen. And what we've seen, you should have enough evidence by now. What we've seen, that even if you elect someone who seems to be on your side, there's enough checks within the system to make sure that that's not going to happen. To make sure that these wild-eyed ideas that you have, they're not going to play out. Certainly not through a traditional political system. So I don't really know what the point is of it. And I should also add too that even if they did, even if some wild, crazy thing did play out, there would be such a technological reaction to it that it would be pointless. I mean, it would make... We often see how, when one president comes in, they undo a lot of the executive orders of the previous president. Now, how much do executive orders mean anymore? I don't know. But we see these sorts of swingbacks, and the pushback that you would see from the global system. And I'm not talking just about capitalism. I'll get to that next. But you would see a pushback, I would say primarily through capitalistic means, just the pressures of the global system. You would see such a pushback that the effect of your attempt to change the course of things, it would be like pulling back the slingshot that would just slingshot the agenda forward in the direction it was going anyway, even faster than it was before. I mean, that's what I think would happen. Now, I'm not going to make that any less abstract for you. But to get into capitalism, now, I really think a lot of you guys should... I talked about this earlier with George Orwell and the politics of the English language. I would really challenge a lot of you guys to stop using these words. Now, I mean, I listen to, hour and a half, 2 hour long podcasts or YouTube conversations. And what often happens is that, 2/3 or 3/4 of the way through, suddenly the people will freeze and they'll say, okay, well, I mean, I guess that means what we mean. I guess that what you just said there, what we've just talked about for so long, that really depends on what you mean by right and left, or that really depends on what you mean by socialism. So all of these terms, and you also often hear people say, and it's true too. You hear them say things that, I don't think real notions of right and left really apply much anymore. And yet they continue to use these terms very frequently in all sorts of very artful arguments, and yet they don't really define the terms very well. And more than that, I think these terms are increasingly impossible to define. So I would really challenge a lot of you guys to stop using these terms. Not just right and left, but also freedom socialism, Marxism, communism, fascism. I think all of these terms, they're less than useless because they mean less than nothing at this point. At least that's the way it seems to me. Now, I'll probably be a hypocrite and I'll probably use these terms in the future, but another one of those terms, I forget if I listed it there, would be capitalism. Now, just an idea to get out there. Marx and most communists, they're not against capital. They're against what was called capitalism as the prevailing force in the society. So whether you can really get rid of capitalism while capital still exists, that's a question in and of itself. But a lot of you, and the worst of them are, well, I don't know if I should get into this. A lot of you guys seem to think that you seem to just use capitalism as like a term for everything. And really what is going on is not capitalism, it's technology. And it always has been technology, and more than technology, what is called technique. The way of doing things, technique itself, which includes technology, and the major outgrowth of technique is technology. So mostly we're dealing in a physical sense with technology, but the sort of DNA code, not just of technology and robots and computers, but the code of the behavior itself is what has been called technique. That is the ruling force on this planet, is technique. Technique uses capitalism. Capitalism is a technique, and it is used by technique writ large with a capital T. So, I mean, all of you people, I don't know why you think, what exactly you mean by capitalism and how you think you could get rid of it without getting rid of capital. And yet I think it would be possible to get rid of probably what you mean by capitalism, but it would mean that you would become severely domesticated animals. Human beings already are domesticated animals, but they have had at least some agency over their lives and prospects. That has been less and less as time has gone on because of the rise of technology. Technology allows us to do more things, but are we really doing the things, or are we allowing technology itself to sort of set higher and higher horizons for itself? I would say obviously it's technology using us to discover what its own possibilities are. And that because we're not choosing to do these things, really. We think that we are, but we're not. Anyway, you could get rid of, I think what you mean as capitalism, if you as a human being become a sort of domesticated animal in a small little techno cage, which is sort of what's been happening. But you could get rid of capitalism if you're just an animal in a cage who is provided with a drip feed of food and entertainment media. In that sense, you could get rid of capitalism for your own life, and everyone else who is in a cage would also be free of capitalism. Now, for whatever forces still exist outside of those cages, whether or not capitalism could describe the sort of interplay between entities outside of that, whether human beings would be part of that or not, it doesn't really matter. Perhaps, but yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the people that want to get rid of capitalism probably would be okay with capitalism existing somewhere outside of where they are, as long as it doesn't impact them. So yeah, I mean, that could happen, I suppose. And yet this obsession with capitalism, it strikes me that human beings in the 21st century arguing about capitalism, it's like zoo animals who don't want to be caged arguing about food. Now, certainly food is an important part of an animal's life, but I mean, if it's an animal or a group of animals who are in captivity against their will, arguing over who gets the most food, it doesn't seem like that is from an outsider's perspective, that's a short-sighted thing for them to be arguing about, because there's these animals, they're unhappy, they want to get out of the prison that they're in, and yet they're arguing about the food that another force simply, throws at them like a chicken feed. And that's what capital is at this point for more and more people. It's handed out, and human beings can squabble over it, but however their squabbling turns out, it isn't really going to affect the larger system that sort of just like provides for them. And you could say that this is a kind system that at least provides for them, because the alternative is to starve them to death. And yet just continually squabbling about capitalism, I mean, it can be important, but it really ignores the larger prevailing factors that are sort of dictating the entire situation. And that sort of gets into basically what I would want to say about all this political philosophy and all of this is that I don't really see how words are going to improve anything at this point. And I say that as someone who has, I've written quite a lot. I devoted a lot of my life to trying to write well and reading a ton. I have a huge library of books. They're all filled with notes that I've taken. And I have to say that really, at this point, and I've thought this for a few years now, I really don't see how coming up with good arguments or even writing just a good book of any sort, I don't really see how that is going to change the situation. Now, I say that as someone who, for most of the last year, I devoted 6 hours every day to writing this book. There's a value in reading and writing and producing. I'm certainly not saying that people shouldn't write books, but you should. I don't know how there can be this expectation that anything is going to change anything, that anything that you write is going to really change anything. And I began this podcast earlier talking about how ridiculous I thought that this person was by saying it's hardly a rare thought that memes can wake people up. Memes, the most rudimentary language out there. And now I'm saying that, well, I don't see how a really good philosophical tract is going to change anything either. And it's not just a question of, well, who can you get that book in front of? If I remember, you remember the photo where Hugo Chavez handed a Noam Chomsky book to Barack Obama. It's kind of cute, but it's pathetic. And who are you going to give your information to? If you could give your information or whatever book you wrote, or you could convince the most famous, powerful people in the world, pick the top 10. Even if all 10 of those people agree completely with what you're saying, the system is just so overdetermined at this point that you are really not going to affect any change, even if you could do that. So I don't really know what the point is of arguing much on the internet about different philosophies or anything. They can be interesting. There's a beauty in philosophical thought. There's a beauty in written words. It's fun to read, and it can open the scope of your mind. I think it's a very unsure proposition, even to say that a book can change one person's life. Now, certainly, if you write a book, if that can change your life, it can be a good hobby. It can be a good pursuit. If you find success with it, you can find different sorts of success that way. But I really don't see why people think that trying to convince someone or successfully convincing someone of anything is really going to alter the system in the way that you guys think that it will. it's been so long since I read them, but I mean, a lot of people are still really talking about how we need to take back Hegel, and we need to free ourselves from Kant and all this stuff. And I really question the degree to which those philosophers, or any philosophers, really have any sort of influence, like some of you guys think. I mean, you guys think that we're like living in, like, I don't know, Hegel's snow globe or something. It really seems that way. Like you look up in the sky and you see like Kant looming down at you or something, and it's like, if you want to be free from these people, the consciousnses that are trapped by these people are the students who are obsessed with them. And I'm not saying that as someone who does not like philosophy students. I like all you guys, but I just don't really see, in a real sense, how you guys think this is really going to affect a lot. I mean, I look in on live streams, and the other day, I don't know if this person is going to listen to this, but one of you guys was talking about how, like, you really thought Kanye was going to, like, become some sort of like a Christ figure, like in a real sense, was going to like lead us to the promised land. Even that is just ludicrous. I mean, it's so absurd. I don't even know what to say. And it's not a question of Kanye not being as smart as, I don't know, Hegel. It's not a question of that. All of this stuff just has an effect as a artifact in the cultural scape. That's all Kanye is. That's all Hegel is. And it doesn't really matter what the content of Hegel is. What matters is the amount that it can impact, and what the nature of impact can even be. And at this point, cultural artifacts, the impact is whether you click like or not. There's no way really for these figures to really change things. I mean, real human beings can change real human beings' lives. To suggest that philosophers or entertainers can is extremely dicey. And what is really changing your life is sort of the cultural interaction. And at this point, it's all on there's such a flimsy interaction point that I'm not sure how it could happen. I mean, how could Kanye sort of like change the way that we live our lives, you know? Or how could like reading Kant or like figuring out a new interpretation of Kant really change anything? I mean, the system that we're in, it's made up of, it's artificial. It's produced by technology. It's increasingly artificial. It's not 100% artificial, but it's increasingly artificial, and it's produced by technology. The depression that people have, the anxiety that people have, it's not because they're alienated from capitalism. In a sense, you could say that was true. Maybe 60 years ago, you could still say it, but it should be obvious now. It's because we're animals who live in an artificial place. You know, the zoo that we find ourselves in has not been made to resemble a humanistic habitat. It is increasingly artificial. We are not zoo animals in a place that looks like our natural habitat. We are lab animals. You know, the way that a rat wants to live, you know, they want to live in a rotten tree or in a burrow somewhere. A rat does not want to live in a clean, slick, white plastic room. And we find ourselves in increasingly artificial environments. And I mean, it's well established that when animals live in environments that do not suit them, they become depressed, they become anxious, they become weird, and that's what happens to us. That has nothing to do with whether or not, you know, you're rich or poor, or whether you have access to healthcare. Not that those things don't mean anything, those things mean a lot, but the primary driver of all of this is that our environment has evolved faster than we have. And that should be a clue that we're not the ones in charge. The technological system that surrounds us is in charge, and it uses us to evolve itself. That's why people are anxious. That's why people are sad. That's the primary reason. The primary indicator that something is wrong, despite the fact that for a long time now, maybe it's a little bit less now, but for a long time now, people have been saying, why are people complaining? The standard of living keeps going up. The average person, or even like the poorest, almost the poorest people today, they live in objective ways that are superior to the way that like the kings and queens of old lived. So why are people unhappy? Now, some people will say, well, they're unhappy because there's envy, because they see that there are extremely wealthy people and they have their wealth rubbed in their faces all the time. That's why people are unhappy. Maybe that's part of it too, but the real reason is because our environments do not suit us. And by our environments, I do not just mean the houses and the rooms that we live in. I mean the entire system. But even within our own spaces, we have increasingly artificial objects. We have cell phones that are increasingly artificial, that have increasing technology in them. We're not suited to this technology. So this is why people are unhappy on a primal level. And to complain about capitalism is it's the equivalent of hearing people complain about capitalism at this point is the equivalent of like leaning over and listening to a farm animal talk to another farm animal about, oh, I want more food. I mean, it's okay, but that's not the driving situation here. Now, when I was talking about the nerd podcasters, when I said that in the end they just want entertainment, they just want to consume something safe, they just want to have a good time consuming something that probably reminds them of previous entertainment that I liked, you may look at all that and look at those people and say, well, these are very reactionary, safe people, and yet I find the exact same thing playing out in this Mark Fisher person that seems to be everywhere. I have no idea why he became such a popular name. I mean, I haven't read his book. I have his book here. I haven't read it yet. I'll do so soon. But I've watched 6 or 7 YouTube lectures from him, and he doesn't. I don't understand. What the devastating criticisms that he has are. He seems in the end to just bemoan the fact that after he got to a certain age, popular music became less interesting to him. And he does make some pretty good points about how there was a style in the 80s and a style in the 70s and a style in the 60s, and then by the end of the 20th century, things began to get a little jumbled, and after 2000, the pop culture, especially music, the styles were no longer as crisply demarcated, and everything in the culture seemed to be replaying itself and remixing itself. He talks about that, and there's an okay amount of truth in it, and it's somewhat interesting. And yet, in the end, it seems that what the heart of his thought is predicated on is just the fact that this guy doesn't have enough new pop culture to enjoy, that he wants more UK jungle music. He keeps talking about how he likes new UK jungle music, and I don't know why that's relevant at all. You know, he just wants to consume something that he likes. In that sense, it's the same as these, I guess you would call them reactionary, short-sighted, fairly non-philosophical YouTubers who just say, well, I wish that the newer Star Wars movies were like the old ones. I mean, what's the difference between them and Mark Fisher? I don't really see what the difference is in a fundamental way. Recently, there's been a lot of confusion over what is meant by revolutionary, or what constitutes the revolutionary, a true revolutionary attitude now, and it's often assumed that the establishment can't be revolutionary anymore because they have control, that the counterculture of 50 years ago or more has completely established control of the culture. And this gives rise to these ideas about how conservatism is the new counterculture, or right-wing is the new punk rock. What we have to do is we have to understand that there's two types of revolutionary attitudes. And the establishment remains revolutionary. But what that strand was a revolt against tradition, a revolt against the natural order. So when you define it that way, then yes, all of the establishment now, they remain a revolt against tradition, a revolt against the normal way of existence. And yet there can be a counter-revolt against that. That's a revolt too. But so often these reactionary revolts, they only want to turn back the clock to a former state of revolt against the natural order. So these are the two types of revolts. To say that, I don't know, pop music is no longer revolting against anything because it is in control. No, it continues to revolt against the natural order in the same way that Elvis did, and the revolt must be constant, otherwise the traditional orders would reassert themselves. The forces that are in control now constitute what Aldous Huxley called the permanent revolution, and the ongoing, unending revolt is against nature itself. There's a lot said about how Franz Kafka's work represents the alienation and the pain of the modern world. It's important to note that the actual pain and the actual anxiety and the frustration that Franz Kafka actually experienced was much more so from other people, particularly from his father, not from abstract institutions. And that's the way that it is now. Most of the suffering, most of the anxiety that we feel, it's because of other people, it's because of other people's actions and inactions and their oversights. It's not from the abstractions that we complain about. These abstractions, the overarching politics, technology, sure, those things influence these other people. But to a large degree, the way that we treat individuals and the way that we are treated by other people those are specific choices. And what we need to do in life, what I would encourage, is to help the people around you and to treat them as well as you can. Those are the choices that we have. That's what's in our control. Changing political systems, changing the course of history, waking up the masses, whatever waking up means. That's not possible. That will not happen. Any sort of wide-sweeping change will be the result of overdetermined series of events. It will not be because of a meme that you made or because of a political argument that you won. Not that you shouldn't try to prove your point at times. Not that we shouldn't make memes to make people laugh. But what really matters is how we treat individuals. That's where our sphere of influence really counts. It's important to note that Franz Kafka, his work may implicitly call for sympathy, but Kafka himself did not whine and did not complain. Because true greatness doesn't come from identifying as a victim or for calling out for sympathy in an overt way. Much of the humor online that I do not appreciate, it's when people are sort of aggressively self-deprecating. Now, self-deprecating humor can be good, but I see a lot of it. I see a lot of people self-identifying as mentally ill, as dysfunctional. And they do so sort of as a joke, but not as a joke. And I feel that this normalizes dysfunction. It also stands as a sympathy ploy. People feel that they can treat others callously. They can perform any sort of actions or inactions. And they have a mental illness card that they can just use. Oh, I wasn't on my pills yesterday. That's why I behaved poorly. Or don't hold me to the standards that a mature human being should be held to. Now, the point isn't to expect more of people than what they're able to provide. The point is for individuals themselves to not suppress their own potentials, including their moral potential. If we want there to be a better world, we need to act like it.
No, I think he's home. You better believe it.
He's home tonight?
Andy, you know, you're really referred to as really the king of the pop world, king of the art world. How do you feel about it? Has your dream come true? Have you got what you want now?
What?
You know, acceptance, you know,
Where's that?
you know, prestige, all the galleries, top money for all your paintings. Are you happy?
Monique, are you happy?
I'm happy to have Andy as a friend.
Asking for the night.